Hello and welcome back to another episode of Football Heritage here with your host, Stephen Clark. Thanks for everyone who's tuning in. I didn't expect to have any viewers at this point, so it's great just to have some people here, even if it is just a couple of friends. So I appreciate you. So today's video, basically, we're going to be breaking down the upcoming Premier League season, which pretty much starts in less than 24 hours at this point. So it's really exciting times coming up. We haven't really had a break from football, not a proper break anyway. It's lasted about maybe 3 to 4 weeks. We had the season just gone by, which was elongated by COVID in the first place. And then we had the players who have gone off into the European and South American tournaments and the Olympics during the summer break. So it's been kind of a weird time period for these players, and it's anyone's guess as to who's fit and what these first 11s are going to look like on the first weekend of the Premier League coming back. Because I would suspect kind of a mixed bag of just internationals, and probably we'll see a few youth players start the first few games. So from that point of view, it should be pretty interesting to see what the teams put out. So the point of today's video is that I'm going to be breaking down my predictions for the table for the Premier League table this season. It's been a hard one to predict. I've kind of gone through methodically and looked at both the transfers and the statistics behind each team's underlying kind of numbers. And it has pulled up some interesting results. Definitely stick around to see kind of where I've placed teams, because I think that some teams are probably going to be pretty mad at me, and some teams might be quite happy with me. So you'll have to tell me in the comments whether or not you think that my outlook on the season is one that you share as well. So we'll kick things off straight away, and I don't think I'll be surprising too many people to be announcing that the bottom team that I've chosen for this 2021 and 2022 season is Watford. Now, under manager Xisco, they finished top of the championship last season, and they did really well to do so, but their playstyle wasn't really one that you could kind of rely on and wasn't iconic. It kind of had this mixture of defensive and attacking playstyles, which I don't always hate, but it does make it harder for your team to kind of naturally adjust. And I just don't think that Watford have the players that can translate that kind of game style into the Premier League. Historically, you either need to have a super defensive setup or a super attacking setup to kind of give yourself a chance, because you can kind of win some games, lose some games, but you can enforce this play style. Kind of playing a bit of both never really quite works out. And I think we saw that with the likes of your Sheffield Uniteds going down last season. They tried to play a bit of both last season, and it just fell flat. So I think that Watford will go down, though I do think the man in this little thumbnail here, Ismaila Sarr, will have a very good season. So I do think Ismaila Sarr will have a really good season. I think that he's a player who's super exciting at the moment, and that I think that Liverpool have been keeping tabs on him. So if we look at it from that point of view, I think that there is something for the Watford fans to kind of rally behind and hope they can kind of get behind. But I do think that this squad, with the addition of just like a Danny Rose into this team, I think Danny Rose has looked like a spent force for a few seasons. So yeah, sorry Watford fans, I can't really help you out here. Hope you prove me wrong. Moving on to the 19th position, I've chosen Southampton. Now, Southampton have been a bit of a mainstay in the Premier League for the last 10 seasons, and they've been a team that I've really enjoyed watching and developing over the years. Some years they've been better than others. Unfortunately, they've been heading on a steep decline lately, and I think that this decline will ultimately end in them being relegated. And they probably need a bit of a rebirth, to be honest, because they spent the majority of their really good seasons in the Premier League selling their best players, often to Liverpool. So I think that they need to have a rethink of their strategy. They need to be able to try and hold on to some of their more rising stars, even just for a few seasons, because I think that the problem is that they have a good season or two, and then they're just off. They sell them straight away. I don't think they try and really even massively monetize the value of these players. Now, I do like the manager Ralph Hasenhüttl. I think that he has had an interesting impact on Southampton, definitely affected the play style, and we can kind of see a more fluid attacking style that he's implemented into this team, with the likes of Danny Ings really thriving last season. But, and this is where it begins, Danny Ings has left the club and he's joined Aston Villa. Now, losing your talisman is bad for any Premier League team, But when you don't replace that talisman, that is even worse. Now, they've brought in Armando Broja, who I guess Southampton fans would probably say would be the quote-unquote replacement for Danny Ings. But as a Chelsea fan myself, Armando Broja, heading on loan from my club to your club, I can tell you right now, he's not the kind of player who is going to keep your club up. He's still developing a lot of the kind of the essential talents to become a Premier League striker. Now, he's got a decent hold up and he will score goals. They call him the Albanian Lewandowski here at Chelsea as a little bit of a funny nickname, but he's just not that kind of player that's going to save you. So I think that if you're putting your hopes in Armando Broja, unfortunately, it's going to be misplaced. Now, the man in the thumbnail here is interesting, Tino Livramento. He is a player who won the Academy Player of the Year at Chelsea last season, and he's been purchased by Southampton on a full-time basis. That is super interesting to me because a lot of Chelsea fans expected him to be in our first team as perhaps the backup to Reece James. Now, he's obviously not liked the idea of being a backup, and he's kind of gone out, and I really respect players who kind of, they don't want to sit around. They say, no, I believe in myself. I back my own talent. And he's gone to Southampton, and I hope that we can kind of see something develop there. I think he's been pretty good for pre-season for Southampton from what I've seen. And yeah, I look forward to seeing him in the Premier League. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on them, but unfortunately, I'm sorry, Southampton fans, I do see getting relegated this season. In 18th position, I've gone for Newcastle. Now, Newcastle have been avoiding relegation like crazy for the last few years. They've really teetered with it. They've flirted with it. Last season, I really expected them to go down, to be honest, and they didn't. So they proved me wrong, and maybe they'll prove me wrong again. We'll just have to find out. But I do think that the over-reliance on Callum Wilson last season is really telling, and I think that this season he's going to find it incredibly hard to replicate that sort of form that would keep them up. Now, they've got the likes of Alan Saint-Maximin in the team as well, who's an excellent ball carrier and progressor, but I just think that relying completely on two players in your team, you're gonna fall down. Callum Wilson, for example, I think I've got on this little stat here that he only averages 26 games per season out of a 38 game season. That's how often he gets injured. He misses 12 games regularly per season. Now, if you have a player that is getting injured that often, you can't rely on them often enough to score the goals that you're going to need. And I do think that Steve Bruce's negative tactics is going to catch up with him this season because we have a lot of really interesting attacking teams. I could see them being on the end of a few thumpings, to be honest. So I see Newcastle getting relegated this season. Just surviving, I see Norwich. Now, this is a bit of an optimistic opinion because I know that a lot of people probably think that Norwich will be one of the 3 relegated teams. But hear me out. So Daniel Farke has implemented a really interesting, successful style for Norwich for the last few seasons, and they were destroyed last time they came to the Premier League because they just weren't kind of routine enough with it. But he's stuck with a few of the main players and has really routinely kind of built them up. Like the likes of Todd Cantwell looks incredibly well adjusted now, and I think that he'll become an excellent Premier League player regardless if Norwich get relegated again. I think that he'll probably stay in the league. I think that Norwich just have an interesting kind of feel about them this season. I think that there is a bit of youth with the likes of Billy Gilmore, obviously coming on from Chelsea, one of the most highly touted prospects at our academy. And hopefully he'll be playing a lot of football this season, which I really look forward to seeing, and it will be a reason for me to tune in to see Norwich play. But yeah, I think that probably the main thing that would scare Norwich fans would be the departure of Emilio Buendia to Aston Villa, because he scored 15 goals last season in the Championship and got 16 assists. Now, Norwich have brought in a replacement for Buendia, which is, his name is Christian Tolisis. I've never heard of him before. He played for PAOK in the Greek Super League, and he scored 16 goals in all competitions last season. So he is a goal scorer and could, in theory, replace that kind of goal threat. But the 16 assists, I just think that having one player who does so much for your team, just the way that you naturally learn to play, your play style is going to be so dependent on having that player there. And to just take Buendia out and be thrust into a harder league, I think Norwich are going to find it quite hard. And honestly, even though I've put them 17th, definitely are heavy contenders to be relegated this season. Moving on now to 16th place, I've got Brentford. Now, Brentford are an exciting team. I think that the way that this team has developed over the last few years, and just in terms of the way that the club culture has changed, it's sort of the Moneyball approach that they've taken. They've really used a stat-driven scouting system, and I think that it's paid off really well for them. And they've made some interesting additions as well in recent times, with the likes of Sergi Canos looking really good, scoring 6 goals and getting 8 assists in the championship last season. I think that as kind of he's sort of like a central attacking midfielder sort of type, I think he will have a really interesting season. I think that he could have a good effect on the club. And I think that the difference between the likes of Brentford and the teams I've mentioned so far is that Brentford have this man, Ivan Toney. Now, Ivan Toney scored 31 goals and he got 10 assists in the championship last season. 22 of those goals were non-penalty goals. So he scored 22 goals without penalties. I think that for any player in the championship, that's a really successful season. I think that he looks like he's really matured since his Newcastle days. And I think that it looks like he's bulked up. He looks like he's got this intelligence. I watched him play in the championship final, and he just looked like he looked like the best player on the pitch, to be honest. And I'm really excited to see what he can bring to this team. Probably the most interesting acquisition Brentford have made is Kristoffer Ajer from Celtic. Now, he's a player that a lot of people have been keeping an eye on for the last few seasons at Celtic, because he's kind of developed along the same sort of route as like a Virgil van Dijk did when he was at Celtic, and he's essentially the same age that Van Dijk was when he left. So it's going to be great to see a player like Kristoffer Ajer come into the Premier League. And if you look at their statistics, they did have comparable statistics during their times at Celtic. So I look forward to watching Brentford play this season, and I do think that they will scrape by their teeth, probably only a few points, but they will survive. Moving on, next I have Burnley. Now, what can you say about Burnley? Sean Dyche is he's just an expert at staying up. I never back them to go down, because I just know that somewhere along the route, his game style will secure points. They will pull off a draw against one of the big 6. They will pull off a miraculous win against the teams kind of in the 10th to 13th area. They just are that sort of team. Not a whole lot to get excited about in terms of transfer business from this Burnley team, but also not a whole lot to kind of worry about heading out. They've only lost Robbie Brady and Ben Gibson over the off-season, and they're 2 players who weren't really affecting the first 11 anyway, so you expect the same kind of players. The only thing you can say, I guess, is that the motivation might be less and less each season, but I just don't see Sean Dyche letting the levels drop for Burnley. They've also brought in Nathan Collins from Stoke for about 10 million euros, and that's an interesting transfer because he's a dominating centre back who played really well in the Championship last season, but I think he only played something like 20 games, so he probably isn't ready for a full season at the back for Burnley, but we'll have to wait and see if he can take that spot. Moving into 14th position here, we have Brighton and Hove Albion. Now, as anyone who watched Brighton last season knows, they were extremely unlucky not to finish higher than they did. I think they ended up finishing 16th last season. So I'm predicting a little bit of a bump from that. And the statistics back that up. They were really unlucky according to expected goals and expected assists and expected points. All pretty much every measure you can use statistically, they were unlucky. The man in the thumbnail here, Neal Maupay, also had a down season in terms of goals. I think he only scored about 6 goals, but his expected goals was standing at around 12, 13. And when you have that kind of disparity, it can't continue for long. So I do expect Neal Maupay to improve this season, which will just improve the points that they get, because the more goals that they're getting, which is the big problem for Brighton, is scoring the goals. So if they can improve that side of the game, I think that they can lift themselves to that kind of 14th territory. They've also done some interesting business with Enoch Mwepu. Hope I pronounced that right. He's a centre midfielder who played with Patson Daka at RB Salzburg, and essentially he is touted as being the long-term partner for Yves Bissouma in the midfield there. Now, the interesting thing about Mwepu is that he creates 3.73 shot-creating actions a game. So from centre midfield, he's creating essentially four more or less 4 shots per game for his teammates or for himself. Now, that's an incredibly attacking centre midfielder, and I think that's essentially an elite stat So it'd be interesting to see if he can transfer that from the Austrian league to the Premier League. It's obviously a massive gap, but hopefully the kind of disparity isn't too bad. So moving on next, we have Crystal Palace. So as we all know, Crystal Palace have appointed a new manager in Patrick Vieira, and a lot of people are kind of unsure about what to make from Patrick Vieira so far in his managerial career. And fair enough, he's had kind of a mixed run, going from the United States all the way to France, and kind of not really making a home for himself anywhere. But I do think that players as good as Patrick Vieira know how to talk football, and I think that they know how to connect to these players. And has to be said, Crystal Palace have done some of the best transfer business out of any team this summer. It might not be the kind of business that shows straight away, but I think that over the next 2 to 3 seasons, they're really going to benefit from it. And I think that they're a club that is now trending upwards from making this transition from Hodgson to Vieira, or at least the playing staff, because they've shifted a lot of players. They've shifted the likes of James McCarthy, Andros Townsend, Gary Cahill, and Patrick Van Aanholt. These players have been staples at Crystal Palace for as long as anyone can remember, essentially, them being in the league. So they will lose that kind of experience, and I do expect that to hurt them at some points during the season. Losing a lot of first-team players and just chucking new players in never really works altogether. But let's have a look at some of the new acquisitions, because I think there's some excellent acquisitions. They've brought in Joachim Andersen, who played for Fulham last season and was he was exceptional for Fulham last season, it has to be said. Despite the fact of how badly they were defensively, Joachim Andersen still was putting up insane stats for a central defender in a relegated team. He was getting 7.39 clearances per 90, 3.82 aerial duels he was winning per 90. He was just putting up elite stats essentially in Europe's top 5 leagues, and I think that's been reflected with this transfer. They've also bought another central defender in Mark Gurhey, the man in the thumbnail here, from Chelsea. Now, he was been playing at Swansea City in the Championship for the last 2 seasons, and to be honest, has looked like the best centre-back in the Championship both those seasons. So he's an exciting player. Chelsea do have a buyback option in the future, but for now, I hope that he just kind of settles into Crystal Palace, gets in, creates a really strong partnership with Joachim Andersen, which I think they will, and just plays really well for them, and hopefully there's a future for him back at Chelsea from my personal point of view. But yeah, I do expect the acquisitions to play well for Crystal Palace. And you also have to look at Olise as well, Michael Olise, who came from Reading, scored 7 goals and 12 assists for Reading last season, was one of the players of the season in the Championship, so another excellent acquisition. And they also brought in Conor Gallagher as well from Chelsea on loan. So yeah, they've done some good business. The only thing you might say is Eberechi Eze is injured for pretty much the entire season. That will hurt them. He was one of their massive ball progressors and ball carriers last season, so we'll have to see how they go. But yeah, I predict good things for Crystal Palace this season. Moving on to 12th, I expect a little bit of a fall for West Ham. Now, my father is a West Ham supporter, so he probably won't like me saying this, but I do think that any team that gets into the Europa League has to strongly invest in the squad, because that is a grueling competition. You play a lot of games. You play pretty much every 3 days for months on end, and if you have a small squad, it can really hurt you. And I do think, looking at West Ham's squad, that I just don't think it's deep enough. I think that they've got some good players, and the starting 11 is arguably probably in the top 8, maybe top 9 teams in the Premier League. But once you go past that starting 11, it just isn't strong enough, like I say. Now, looking at the business that they've done so far, they have done one piece of really good business, in my opinion, which is bringing in Alphonse Areola from Fulham. I think that he was one of the league's standout goalkeepers last season, with Emi Martinez for Aston Villa. And I think that he will have a pretty good impact, because Fabianski is getting pretty old, and I think that having that transition to Areola will just help out the team. And you can always rotate them in the Europa League. So that's a position that they have actually filled quite well. But apart from that, there's rumours of Kurt Zouma, but nothing concrete enough yet. They've let Felipe Anderson go and Fabian Balbuena. Now, for me, letting those 2 players go is a big mistake, because They just need those players for the Europa League run. Felipe Anderson is the perfect kind of player to have ready to go for the Europa League, because he's clearly not producing at a level at the Premier League, but he's the kind of player that you can chuck into the team. You know he's going to do his job. I'm really surprised that they let him go this season of all seasons. You have to say the striker situation is interesting as well. Mikel Antonio is another player who just is perennially injured and is reliable when he's on the pitch, but how long can you keep him fit? You never know. I think that I'm expecting them to drop down a little bit, and I think that if I'm West Ham and I'm David Moyes, I look at the Europa League and I see this is our best chance, probably in a long time, to get into the Champions League, because the Europa League is winnable. If you can finish sixth in the Premier League like they did last season, you can win the Europa League. It's not an incredibly hard competition. With a bit of luck, you can get yourself deep into the stages, and then you're just talking about winning a few games. So yeah, the last thing I'll just say about West Ham is that I've been really looking forward to seeing Said Benrahma explode, and from what I hear from some West Ham fans, he's had a really good preseason. I hope that him coming into the side for their sake can kind of bring that extra added flair, and maybe he will be the difference maker between last season and this season. But yeah, for now, I'm going to have to back them in at 12th. Moving on, we move to Wolves, so this is an interesting season for Wolves, because losing Nuno Espirito Santo as the manager and bringing in Bruno Lage will be sort of, in my opinion, a bit of like a rebirth of this club, because they kind of forged their identity in the Premier League, they kind of hit the heights that they were going to hit, brought themselves into the Europa League, but unfortunately the season after they fell down, like I was just talking about with West Ham, as usually happens to teams who make it into the Europa League but don't have the squad depth. Now, they've been investing in their squad really well for the last few years, and I think that they've added some more sort of unknown to medium known talents from Portugal again. Surprise, surprise. The likes of Francisco Trincao from Barcelona on loan will be an interesting one to see what he can produce for the club. I think that this will be a trying time for Wolves, but I do see them having a better season than last season, and I think that their return as well of Raul Jimenez will be crucial in that, because his goals last season is probably the main thing that they missed. So yeah, I predict that Wolves will finish 11th this season. Then we move on to Everton. So Everton finished 10th last season, and I suspect they might finish again this season. The additions, just looking at the additions, it's been, in my opinion, probably one of the worst transfer windows out of any of the clubs. They've brought in Demarai Gray, Asmir Begovic, and Andros Townsend. Really uninspiring signings if you're an Everton fan. I think it looks like kind of mid-table mediocrity has been accepted. Your one hope maybe is that Rafa Benitez can kind of summon the sort of managerial spirit and talent of old, but who knows. What you will get from Rafa Benitez is that defensive solidarity. That I know as a Chelsea fan, and a lot of Newcastle fans I'm sure will back up the fact that that is his strong suit, and he can do that. Ben Godfrey is probably the player I'd expect to explode for you this season. He looked really good last season. He was averaging 2.84 blocks per 90, which is in the elite category, and 2.38 aerial duels won, which was in the 40th percentile. So that was kind of the room that I expect him to improve on, that sort of aerial duels, because a centre back should probably be winning at least kind of in the three sort of. If you're wanting to be an elite centre back, you should be winning probably 4 aerial duels a game. So he needs to really bump those numbers if he wants to be considered elite. Dominic Calvert-Lewin in the thumbnail there. He had a decent season last season. It'll be interesting to see if he can replicate that form, and if he is the man that they can trust long term in that position. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. But for this season, I can't really back them in any further than 10th. Moving up now, we go to Leeds, who also, they finished 9th last season, and I suspect they'll probably do so again. Now, they've done some good business here, bringing in Junior Firpo, who's in the thumbnail here. He is an explosive left back who can be considered essentially like a left winger almost by the time that he spends in the opposition box. I've got a little stat here that he got a 3.29 touches in the opposition penalty box per 90 for a left back. That is like 99th percentile. That is insane. So I'd expect to see this guy up and around the opposition box, making those kind of last minute cutbacks and crosses and sort of being a dangerous threat. And, he's also a goal threat himself. So I would expect him to kind of be in and amongst the attacking situations for Leeds this season. Though looking at his negatives, he does rank low in terms of tackles, interceptions, and pressures. But that being said, those are the things that Marcelo Bielsa can really improve in a player. Upping the defensive work rate as well as the attacking work rate. He really likes kind of his players to maintain that pressure constantly. So I'd expect a few of those numbers to go up for him. Apart from that, they've brought in Jack Harrison on a permanent, which is a decent move, but doesn't really change the situation. And they lost Alioski, but they've replaced him with Firpo, like I mentioned. So sort of like for like there. So I suspect them to have a similar season to last season, which, will be pretty good for the Leeds fans. And to finish ninth 2 successive seasons is nothing to smirk at. And I think that it'll give them a stepping stone for even greater things if they can pull some big moves off in the transfer season in the coming summer. Moving on to 8th. So I know I'll probably be upsetting one particular Tottenham fan I know right now, but I've been thinking about it a lot and looking at the underlying numbers, and I do think that 8th place is probably where Tottenham are likely to finish. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this. I'm assuming personally that Harry Kane is going to stay, and if you look at the club around Harry Kane, I think that it's kind of going through a transitional phase, and I think that Tottenham might actually be better off selling him, taking the money in this phase, because now they're in a position where they weren't in with Gareth Bale. I think where the club is extremely stable, and I think that if they hold on to him for too long and the results continue to drop like they already have with Kane in the team, I think that the status of the club will drop even further and further and further. And then when Harry Kane does eventually go, which he will, it'll just hurt the club even more. So yeah, I do think that personally they should probably cash in for Harry Kane now, but whether or not they will, we'll have to wait and find out. Talking about their upcoming season, we have to just essentially look at the transfer business that they've done, and it's really interesting. There's some good additions in there, and I'll talk about the additions that I like. So we've got Christian Romero from Atlanta. Now this guy's a centre back, but looking at his percentiles, he is just elite. I'm really excited to see him play. Didn't know too much about him. I saw a few games of Atlanta last season, but nothing to really cement him as a household name for me. But looking at his underlying stats, wow, Tottenham are getting a player here. So Romero, he had 17.12 pressures per 90 in the elite category, 2.92 touches per 90, tackles, per 90, which is great for a centre back. 4.6 aerial duels won, so that's the aerial duel stat I was talking about. You want that there's 4 aerial duels won per game. It just means that he's dominating his opponent. It means that even if you chuck a big striker up against him, he's more than likely going to win. And lastly, he also has a 2.75 interceptions per game. So he's just an elite ball winner, and he will be able to retain possession and take possession back for Tottenham a lot. And I think he's going to have some interesting battles with a lot of players this season in the Premier League. He also has an 89% passing accuracy, which is also in the elite category. So he's not just someone who is a sort of one-trick pony with the interceptions and tackles and aerial duels. He also can pass and can play. So yeah, I think they're getting a real Rolls Royce of a player here, Tottenham. The other one is Brian Gill, who looks like an interesting player, was obviously swapped for Lamela. He's extremely highly touted. Personally don't know a lot about him. It'll be interesting to see how much he plays this season. And yeah, I think we'll just have to watch him develop in the Premier League. But I do think that these are the right additions for the next phase of Tottenham, which is why I think that Harry Kane should probably get out and why Tottenham should cash in so they can truly invest in this next stepping stone. Because I think that if you can rebuild the next elite team, that's better than holding on to the past. Because I think that with the departure of Alderweireld, Lamela, Bale's gone, they lost Vertonghen last season as well. Even Son is aging. Dele Alli doesn't look like half the player he did. Same with Eric Dyer. That old team has kind of phased out, and I think that Tottenham would do good to progress into the next phase, which it looks like they're starting the steps. So good for them, but I do think this season it'll be a bit of a warm-up season for the eventual progression. Moving on to 7th place. So I've really backed in Aston Villa here. Um, Now, a lot of people will probably think they'll finish a lot lower, but for me personally, just looking at the business that they've done, I think that they've probably won the transfer market in terms of the Premier League teams, and that includes all of the Premier League teams. Um, so Aston Villa, they finished 11th last season, so this would be a massive step up to go from 11th to 7th, and would probably most likely see them play in some sort of UEFA competition, depending on how the cup results go. Which would be an amazing moment for Aston Villa and just the perfect kind of progression that that club is wanting to see. I really like Dean Smith as a manager. I loved what I saw from Aston Villa last season. I loved what they brought to the league. There was a lot of interesting acquisitions even back then. We saw a lot of great stuff from Jack Grealish, but let's talk about Jack Grealish, because obviously he's left to Manchester City for 100 million euros, and obviously losing a player like Jack Grealish is going to hurt your team. But what I do think is interesting about the Jack Grealish departure for Aston Villa's point of view is that they essentially played half of last season without Jack Grealish. So, in my opinion, it's not the same as when Norwich have lost Emi Buendia, because Jack Grealish has already been out half the season. So they've learned to play without him. So I think that by bringing in a player like Buendia into the club, you're just going to have another talisman kind of slot right in. So hopefully they can kind of adjust well. They've also brought in Danny Ings. So Danny Ings was just one of the most underrated strikers of last season. If you just look at some of his underlying stats that I've got here, he completed 1.53 dribbles per 90, which is great for a Premier League striker. And 2 blocks per 90 as well. So he was just an all-action kind of striker, getting involved in everything. And you love to see a ball carrier like Danny Ings in your front line if you're Aston Villa, because a lot of your attacking chances are probably going to be from counter-attacks. Now, the most exciting of all the additions, in my opinion, actually isn't Emi Buendia, who I think is already an incredible signing for Aston Villa. But I actually think if you look at the underlying numbers behind Leon Bailey, I think that we see that this is going to be one hell of a player. So let's have a look at some of his stats here. 3.83 dribbles completed per 90. 5.27 touches in the opposition box per 90. 8.65 progressive passes per 90. And 0.48 non-penalty goals per 90. So this is a guy who scores in essentially every second game. This is elite stats, and I'm really surprised. I was actually really surprised looking at these statistics, because I'd kept an eye on Leon Bailey for a few years because he used to be linked to Chelsea back in the day. I didn't expect his stats to be this good. So looking now, I think that they've got a hell of a player, and to be honest, if he can keep fit, I think that they might not even miss Jack Grealish. Moving on now, let's go to my 6th place finish, which is Arsenal. So Arsenal, some people might expect to see Arsenal a bit lower on this list. I kind of get that. They've been trending downwards for a few years now, for sure. But I've got a few things that I think about Arsenal, and I don't particularly rate Arteta as like a long-term Arsenal trophy-winning manager, though he did win the FA Cup and he beat Chelsea. So what do I know? But looking at their performances and the back end of last season, they were the 3rd best for points after Christmas. What does that mean? Essentially, it means that they performed when the pressure was off because they knew they couldn't win anything then. Maybe they had an easy run of fixtures. I haven't delved deep enough into those fixtures to know. But the stat remains the stat. They were the 3rd best team after Christmas officially in points. So I would expect to see kind of a continuation of that trend, specifically because they were relying on the young players then, and I think that that's an interesting one. Probably the biggest thing for Arsenal in terms of what they already had is that Aubameyang had a really down season last season. I think that really hurt them. He was only scoring 0.35 non-penalty goals per 90, so only 0.35 goals per 90. That's 1 goal every 3 games, essentially. Just not enough when you are essentially the main goal scorer at the club. I think they really were being hurt by that statistic. They've looked at Lautaro Martinez, who would be an interesting option. Um, his own stats sit at 0.52 non-penalty goals per 90, so one every second game. It would be an interesting addition, but probably just out of their price range, I'd say. Um, the most interesting addition definitely is that of Ben White from Brighton. He had some interesting underlying stats last season. 0.68 dribbles completed, 0.5 progressive passes per 90. Though it did have a few negative stats looking at it. I'm a fan of Ben White just off the eye test. I thought he was a really good player last season. But looking at the stats, he does kind of average out in a lot of the key stats, specifically the 1.47 aerial duels. That leaves him in the bottom 10%. Now, he isn't a physically imposing defender. He's definitely more of the silky kind of ball player. But that is a significant weakness in a player who is going to face a lot of tough opposition, tough, tall, strong opposition. And to be honest, he's not going to help that stereotype that Arsenal defenders have been kind of weak and a bit flimsy over the last few years. So hopefully, from Arsenal perspective, they'll be hoping that he can improve on those stats. And definitely, he's still a young player. I expect him to improve in a lot of those areas. But it is something perhaps to kind of consider at the moment. Yeah. So I predict Arsenal will finish 6th. Moving on to Leicester City. So they finished 5th last season, and I specifically think they will finish 5th again. It'll be really unlucky for Brendan Rodgers because it'll be the 3rd season in a row that they finished 5th if this does come true. I just think that the top 4 is a really hard thing to crack, and I think that no matter how good your business is, you just have to have essentially a full run with your best 11, and just I just can't see that happening for Leicester. They've got such a bad track record with injuries. I think Jamie Vardy is on the outs now in terms of his best form. We have seen the best of Jamie Vardy now, in my opinion. But I do still think that this squad is strong enough to compete at that top end of the table, and I do think they are better than the likes of Arsenal and Spurs and even Aston Villa, who I expect to improve a lot. Let's have a look at some of their underlying stats here. So they've brought in Patson Daka, the man in the thumbnail here, as they probably will overtake Vardy this season as their leading striker. He scored 51 goals and got 10 assists over the last 2 seasons, which is just ridiculous numbers. It's great numbers, but it was obviously in the Austrian league, so how much you can take of that, it's always 50-50. Yeah, he looks like an interesting player, and I think that his qualities should shine through for them. They've also bought Babakare Soumare, who is an imposing midfielder, and I think will be a great addition to the team. He has 6.63 progressive passes per game and 1.82 interceptions per game. So he is the kind of player that is all action. He runs forward with the ball and he will make those interceptions, those tackles. Probably the kind of player that they haven't had since N'Golo Kante left their club. They're probably one of the most interesting additions this season, and it looks like it's going to be wrapped up really soon, is that of Yannick Vestergaard. So he's a player that I really enjoyed watching at Southampton last season, and is one of the reasons why I've put Southampton down so low, is because they're going to lose this guy. So Vestergaard is winning 3.78 aerial duels per 90, so he's in that 90th bracket for those winning those headers, winning those physical battles. Gets 2.13 tackles per 90 as well, a really good stat for him there, and 1.57 touches in the opponent's penalty box. So essentially, every single time the ball is getting crossed in from a corner, he's getting his head to it. So take that what you will. I think he'll be a threat. I think he'll be a really good addition, especially for the injured Wesley Fofana, who unfortunately is going to miss a lot of this season by the looks of things. So yeah, I just don't see them having enough to break the top 4, unfortunately, for Leicester fans. In 4th position here, we have Liverpool. So this is where it really gets tight, really. The top 4 could be super interchangeable, in my opinion. I think these are the 4 best teams in the league, and I think that any one of them could actually win the league this season. So looking at what Liverpool have done this season, they've brought in Harvey Elliott back from loan. Hopefully he gets a chance in the club. And Ibrahima Konate is kind of the other marquee signing, I guess, for the season. It was confirmed a while ago, though, so Liverpool fans might be a little frustrated at the lack of transfer movement in the club, specifically having seen Jorginho Wijnaldum leave the club. It looks like they might be a bit thin in midfield, which they already felt like they were thin in midfield, so we'll have to see what they do towards the end. They could be a surprise package though, because they performed quite poorly last season, specifically in attacking areas. But the underlying stats did suggest that they deserved a bit better. The likes of Salah and Mane, we know can produce on the highest stage, and I would expect them to come back even stronger this season. Specifically Mane, who's had kind of a hard time the last few years. The last year, not last few years. Yeah, so the only thing about Kanate I will say is that delving deep into his stats, I kind of found a similar thing to Ben White, which is that he kind of averaged out in a lot of the key stats. So, yeah, he wasn't ranking over elite in anything overall, but was solid in a lot of his stats. Uh, he's getting 1 dribble per 90, which was probably his best stat, which is a good stat for a centre back. But yeah, it didn't look like anything special on paper, but obviously FSG and the Liverpool hierarchy have seen something that they like, and they tend to be quite good at identifying talent, specifically in the last few years, specifically under Klopp. So he'll probably end up being really good. Moving on to third place. This is the shocker of everything. I can tell already that any Manchester City fans that see this are going to be like, what are you talking about? We've won 4 of the last 5 Premier Leagues. We're an extremely good side. We're under Pep Guardiola. We've just added a £100 million player to our side. Why have you put us third? Well, I am a true believer in the evolution of sides and the kind of life, the life expectancy of a team. Having seen it numerous times at Chelsea, where the natural winning players essentially just cycle out of the club. I think that losing Sergio Aguero is a serious loss, despite him not playing too much last season. I think that his presence around the club will be felt and missed, and the more of these kind of iconic players you lose at the club, no matter how much you try and replace them, there is always a slight adjustment period. So I do see that having a small effect. Yeah, let's talk about Grealish. So Grealish coming into the club he's an elite player. He gets 6.92 progressive passes per game, 12.60 progressive carries per game, 7.29 touches in the opposition's box each game. Just elite stats. He will be one of the best players in the league next season. But I do think he will push someone out of their position. Now, if they do go ahead and sign Harry Kane, this would solve all the issues that I have with this, because I think that if you have Harry Kane, they score the goals that they need and they just win the league. But I don't think they'll get him at the moment, meaning that I think that they're going to have to try cram 3 of Grealish, Foden, Mahrez, and Sterling in. And I think that balance is going to be really tricky to find, because I'm not sure any of them are particularly goal scorers. Probably the most likely actual out-and-out goal scorer out of those is Raheem Sterling, and he's a terrible finisher, let's be honest. So yeah, I'm not sure who exactly they're going to be relying on for goals. I would highly doubt it'd be Gabriel Jesus. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see who they actually rely on for goals, to be honest. And yeah, to be honest, I just think that naturally they're going to just be focused on winning the Champions League. You know, that was such a big expectation on Pep Guardiola when he came in, and to have lost the last season, to get so close, I think he'll really focus on it this season. And I probably would expect them to win the Champions League this season. But I'm predicting they don't win the Premier League this season, and I think that it'll be another team. Second place. So I've just revealed who I think is going to win the Premier League by default. But I'll quickly touch on Manchester United. So I really like the evolution of this United side. I think that the additions of Sancho and Varane are really smart ones. I think that they're just going to improve the side massively. And I've really actually, I really don't like Manchester United, as you can imagine, as a Chelsea fan. But I have enjoyed watching, sort of, maybe enjoy is the wrong word. I've definitely appreciated the growth of this team, and I've started to be turned around on Ollie as a manager just ever so slightly, because I think he's brought out the best in his best players, and I think that that's all you can really ask from a manager at the end of the day, is to bring out the best in your best players. So let's have a look at some of the stats here. So bring in Jadon Sancho. This guy, in my opinion, is probably going to be the young player of the season. 0.5 assists per 90. He gets an assist every second game. 9.34 progressive passes per game. 10.6 progressive carries. 3.86 completed dribbles. These are elite stats again. And I just think that He's got some of the best stats that we've ever seen from a player of his age. I think it's going to be really exciting to have him back home in the Premier League and to see what he can do. I think he'll slip right into this United side like a glove. And yeah, I think that he'll be a great addition. Alongside Varane, obviously Varane's an elite player already in name and in experience. His stats don't exactly bear that out at the moment, but Real Madrid had a bit of a down season, so you can't fully account for that. We know his quality. He's a world-class defender. There's no arguing that. The player that I actually want to highlight really quickly about why I think United will finish second is Edinson Cavani. So Edinson Cavani played sort of a bit part role towards the start of last season and then kind of came into his own at the end. Had some injury issues along the way. But if he can put together a full season of fitness, look at these stats. 0.69 goals per 90. Essentially, he's scoring a goal more often than he's not in a game. 79% pass completion. So he's involving himself in all the attacking fluid movement going forward, and he's linking the play. I think when you have players like Rashford and Sancho overlapping, and you've got players like Bruno and Pogba to pick you up behind you, I think that he's going to have a really great time of things. And I think that if you just look at the stats, he's marking elite for strikers. And if he can get a full season together and keep those stats at the elite level, he will score a lot of goals and could propel them to win the title, realistically. But I have not chosen them to win the title. I've chosen them to be pipped to the post by, of course, my club, Chelsea Football Club. Now I can see the eyes rolling already. I can feel the negativity, but I'm gonna try and explain myself here. So there's a certain feeling that you get when you come into a season as a fan. You kind of know how your team's gonna perform. Some people are kind of hopeful optimists. Some people are negative and pessimistic. Me, I usually try to be somewhere in the middle. But this season, I can't help but get really excited. I think that I've got the same feeling that I had last time we won the league under Conte, that everything is slightly against us, and we're kind of slipping ever so slightly under the radar. And I think with the addition of Romelu Lukaku into a team that's already won the Champions League last season, I think that we're looking at a team that is just going to essentially hit its prime this season and next season. And we're seeing some players who have been developed, like Mason Mount, Reece James, and Jonas Christensen, all coming into the prime age of their careers as well. And I'm really excited about what's going to happen. So I've marked 2 players as kind of the key players to Chelsea's title charge this season. Unsurprisingly, one of them is N'Golo Kante. Now, N'Golo Kante was back to his best last season in the Champions League. He won the man of the match in both the semi-final games and in the Champions League final in itself. He was absolutely elite, and some of the stats bear that out. 2.48 interceptions per 90, ridiculous. 2.42 blocks per 90, outrageous. And 1.73 dribbles completed per 90. So not only is he winning back the ball, blocking counterattacks and shots, he's also dribbling the ball like a lot during the game, essentially, as well. He's bringing the ball forward, and if you just watch him, you can see it as well. He takes the ball and then instantly he springs into a counter attack, and that's so helpful for a side like Chelsea that has so much pace and really thrives on those counter attacking moments. I think he's perfect for our midfield, and I think that this could be the best version of N'Golo Kante that we see under Tuchel. The second player I've earmarked here is obviously the new incoming signing, Romelu Lukaku. So last season, he obviously won the league in Italy for Inter Milan, and he was the MVP for the club as well. He had 0.62 non-penalty goals per 90, which is in the elite bracket for strikers. 0.3 assists, which was also in the elite bracket for strikers. So he's assisting and he's scoring goals at an elite level already in a top 5 league. That usually does translate extremely well. 3.5 shot creating actions per game. So he's creating shots. 12 progressive passes per 90. So he's passing the ball forward as well. And 7.72 touches in the attacking box. So that's akin with Jack Grealish. So he's getting the ball and he's actually receiving the ball a lot in the box, which is nice to see. That stat tells you that he's getting on the ball and in the right positions in the opposition's box. And it means that he's also losing his marker. There is one little room to improve for Lukaku, which is just his 2.8 shots per 90, which kind of ranks sort of in the 70th percentile. I think that with the amount of chances that this Chelsea team creates, he will improve those numbers drastically. I mean, just look at some of the chance creators in this team. Mason Mount, 4.64 shot creating actions per 90, 21 pressures per game, 2.3 tackles per game. Timo Werner, 6.8 touches in the opponent's box, 2.69 shots a game. Christian Pulisic, 8.58 progressive carries per game. So he's carrying the ball over 20 yards 8 times a game. So he's just running past players, dribbling past players, creating chances. Hakim Ziyech creates 5.3 creates 5 shots a game essentially. So either through his own shots or through passes that create shots. This is a team that really thrives on chances, and they need a lot of chances to score. So hopefully, if Lukaku can change that, this team should be able to score at an elite level and propel themselves up the league, alongside having an elite midfield with Jorginho and Conte, and elite fullbacks and elite centre backs, and a really well performing goalkeeper who is yet to be seen if he is elite in a long term sense. But just the team looks ready for a title charge, and I think that they're going to catch everyone by surprise. And my prediction is that Chelsea win the league. Is it naive? Probably, but we'll have to wait and see at the end of the season. So that's pretty much going to wrap up my predictions, guys. Thanks for everyone who has joined in for the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that I haven't angered too many people in the comments. I can see a comment here. How am I going to do Spurs like that? Sorry there, mate. I think that yeah, I've probably angered a few fans here, but it's at the end of the day, it's just my predictions. If you disagree with them, then yeah, what do I know? To be honest, at the end of the game, choosing Premier League predictions is like trying to choose the winning lottery numbers sometimes. So that's pretty much gonna end the stream, guys. Thanks for everyone who's joined in throughout. It's been really fun for me personally to do a lot of this research and to tell it to you guys. And looks like we had a few people join in, so I really appreciate everyone that stayed for the journey. So yeah, I'll have another video going up tomorrow, where I'm gonna kind of talk about the players that we should be excited about, and also do a bit of a preview of the first weekend of matches. So be sure to join in for that. And until then, guys, thanks for watching Football Heritage.